Hey everyone, it's Carbon here. I just want to start this guide first by saying that if this guide sounds a little weird, I'm sorry about that, but the room that I normally record in is currently being remodeled, and that leaves me with the living room. So if there's a bit of sound weirdness going on here, you can chalk it up to that. And without further ado, let's talk about Abra. And to start, the psychic type itself is weird. It's not as simple to define as many of the elemental types like fire or water. As its name implies, it's a type that is deeply tied to the mental energy of the Pokemon itself and the creatures and people around it. This leads to every single one of them being able to manipulate those energies to attack and defend themselves and to manipulate their environment. Think of moves like Confusion, Hypnosis, and Light Screen. As well, this ability to interact with and manipulate the mental energy of the world often, but not always, leads to them having immense mental faculties. Meaning they're usually pretty freaking smart. Like, a lot of them have human-level intelligence just in a Pokemon. And one of the best examples of this is the kind of power that's in the Abra line. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Pokemon Care Guides, where we go through how you would raise and keep different Pokemon lines in your own home. Today, we'll be talking about the psychic powerhouse Pokemon Abra and its evolutions Kadabra and Alakazam. Abra is a 3-foot tall, 43-pound Pokemon that has an interesting body shape. It has a primarily yellow body with a brown chest and thick, round tail. Its hands and feet each have 3 digits on them, and are both hooked like claws. Weirdly enough, though I think that it's a mammal, its body seems to have segmented armor across it that looks a lot like the carapace of a bug-type Pokemon. And the last thing to mention about Abra is that it actually spends the majority of its time asleep. It uses its immense psychic abilities to levitate itself, and to sense danger coming while it's sleeping. And then it teleports itself away with those same psychic abilities, just in case you needed more confirmation of its impressive mental abilities. Upon evolving into a Kadabra, it keeps the same general body shape with the segmented armor, the yellow and brown color scheme, and the fox-shaped head. Now though, it has a large bushy tail, a mustache, and a symbol of 3 wavy lines on its abdomen. It now also stands at 4 foot 3 inches tall, and weighs an average of 125 pounds. Oh, and it's now fully awake, and they tend to get their hands on a spoon as they strangely use them to amplify their abilities. Now, most Kadabra will actually remain that way their entire lives, as Alakazam is actually another trait evolution, meaning they need to experience a sharp electrical shock to their system for it to happen. Alakazam keeps the same overall body shape as its previous evolutions, with the chitinous yellow and brown armor. Really, the only major difference from Kadabra are its height, now standing around 5 feet tall, its weight, averaging around 105 pounds, and the fact that the facial hair grows much longer, becoming a sort of mustache, while this Pokemon also loses its tail. Oh, and the fact that their psychic abilities are massively increased. Like, to the point where it's routinely stated that they're smarter than humans. Which is gonna make caring for it very interesting. So, let's just dive straight into the guide and figure out if these Pokemon from this line are the perfect Pokemon partners for you. Enclosure. Funny enough, the fact that these Pokemon are so smart actually makes the enclosure for them very easy. You should just treat them like a person. They're about the same size and eventually will match or even eclipse you in brain power, so it just makes sense to treat them that way. Honestly, the best thing to do for them is to keep them in your house, meaning that you will end up having to devote an entire room to these Pokemon, as keeping them in anything less would really just be mistreatment with how smart they are. Or, if you don't want to do that, then you could get them their own building that's separate from your house, almost like a shed that we always use. But they'll need something of higher quality than just a shed. Like those tiny houses that you can buy and have delivered online. That would be perfect for them. Either way, the best enclosure for these Pokemon is going to be along those lines. As for any decorations and additions that you'll need a feeding dish for Abra, as they tend to munch throughout the day thanks to their psychic napping. Kadabra and Alakazam, well, it might be a bit weird, but you'll either need to get them their own table to give them their meals on, or you can simply feed them at your table alongside yourself. I'm telling you, after Abra, these Pokemon go from being pets that you can take care of, to pretty much roommates that can only communicate with their brains. It's weird to make a guide about, but that's really just the facts. Anyway, Abra will also need a water dish that it can drink from. The later evolutions, well, they can either bring water to their mouths using their psychic abilities, or they can be taught how to use a glass much like a human. They'll also need a place to sleep, so a comfy single twin bed should do the trick. And last but not least, they will need some form of mental stimulation. Pokemon like this, their minds are their most important body part, and the mind needs to be worked just like any other muscle. So you're going to be looking for things like puzzles, object manipulation tests that they can use their psychic abilities for, solid, tangible things that they can interact with and test their psychic abilities on. Things like crossword puzzles and complex logic and math problems won't work for them as, while they are smart, they are still Pokemon. Math and a human language mean nothing to them, no matter how smart they are. To a Pokemon that can communicate its wants and feelings with a simple thought, language is simply a step back. So again, to keep your Pokemon stimulated, you'll be looking for real, physical objects that they'll have to think about and use their abilities on to manipulate. The last part of this surprisingly short enclosure section is going to be any other Pokemon that can be housed with them. Really, it's going to depend on the other Pokemon. Thanks to the massive intelligence that these Pokemon display, they can really get along with and recognize any Pokemon as a companion. So you're going to look at the other Pokemon to see if things will work out. That means that you shouldn't get anything that's too aggressive or territorial or will try to attack the other Pokemon. This will just cause your Abra to teleport away, and your Kadabra and Alakazam will psychically slam the other Pokemon into a wall. Speaking of which, remember, you'll be either keeping these Pokemon in your home, or you'll be keeping them in their own home. So any Pokemon that gets housed with them should be appropriate for that situation. But, aside from that, the only hard no that I would say being housed with these Pokemon would be any Ghost or Dark types. Those two types both give off a type of energy that negatively impacts Psychic types. But, aside from that one caveat, it really is dependent on what you're willing to raise and what you think your Abra line Pokemon will be willing to put up with. Availability. So, these Pokemon are in a weird place when it comes to availability. Abra itself isn't all that hard to find. Sure, it's not the most common Pokemon out there, but in the places that it does appear in the wild, you should be able to find one after just a bit of work. There are places like Granite Cave in Hoenn, routes 203 and 215 in Sinnoh, and plenty of places all over the Kanto region. Your biggest issue is going to be actually catching it. We'll talk about this again in the care section, but Abra itself actually has a built-in defense mechanism where if it senses any kind of unfamiliar irregularity in its environment, or anything dangerous coming towards it, it will teleport away. You need to be very lucky and very stealthy to get a hold of one, and oftentimes even that isn't enough. It's really the lucky person who's able to catch a wild Abra. As for Kadabra, they can be found a bit less common than Abra, but they still aren't that hard to find. And catching them is a lot easier as they won't just teleport away from you the moment they sense you, so you might actually have a chance with them. And lastly, with Alakazam, you aren't really going to find them in the wild too often. It's the same issue with the Politoed evolution. Sure, the right conditions needed for this kind of evolution could happen in the wild if a Kadabra gets exposed to exactly the correct form of electrical stimulation, but it's almost unheard of. Realistically, the only place that you're going to get an Alakazam is trading a Kadabra with another trainer. Speaking of other trainers, the breeder scene for these Pokemon is decent, but not the most robust out there. Due to the intelligence of these Pokemon, raising and caring for them is fairly easy. But that same intelligence often makes breeders, myself included, feel slightly uncomfortable breeding and selling them to people. There are people out there that will do so, but it's treated much differently than what I do. So just be prepared that when you go to get one, it won't just be a simple purchase online or a trade through a machine. You'll most likely have to go to the breeder, meet the Pokemon, and see if the Pokemon themselves will choose you just as much as you choose them. And as for what a breeder will have available for you to pick from, they should have plenty of Abra and Kadabra available, and if you want an Alakazam right away, then getting one from someone who's selling Kadabra should be a piece of cake. Care. This is going to be the section that's going to be the strangest. Thanks to the intelligence of these Pokemon, you're almost going to be treating them like a needy roommate, like I said in the Enclosure section. So this isn't going to be about you doing things for your Pokemon so much as it's going to be about setting them into patterns when they're young and reinforcing those patterns as they get older and mature. So step 1 is making sure that these Pokemon are comfortable around you, especially Abra. Because if you startle them, or they're just not used to human beings being around them, then they'll teleport away and you'll have no idea where they are. Getting a breeder-raised one is very helpful with this as they're born around people and become used to the human presence. They may still be nervous around you as you are a new person and they are in a new environment, but they won't just leave immediately. If you do get one from the wild, then you'll have to put in a bit of work to get these Pokemon to trust you. The best setup I've found for this is to have a Pokemon that can keep the Abra from teleporting. Whether it's one that has an ability like Arena Trap or Shadow Tag, or if it's one that knows the move Mean Look. Each of these will give you a window where you'll be able to work with the Pokemon and gain its trust. Without these kinds of restrictions on your Abra's ability to teleport away, you won't even get a chance to try building a bond with your Pokemon. When not in these training sessions, you'll want to keep the Abra in its Pokeball. That will allow it to have a safe space for it to sleep in without you worrying that it'll just up and vanish on you because it got spooked. Now, as for what you're going to be doing to gain its trust, you'll start with slowly approaching it while making yourself as non-threatening as possible. Get low to the ground, speak to it softly in a calm, reassuring tone, using calming words. Try to keep the idea in your mind that you're a friend and you aren't there to cause harm. Remember, these are strong psychic-type Pokemon, so they will pick up on your thoughts and your emotions. As well, that ability to look into your mind and understand your thoughts and intentions will greatly expedite this process, as the Abra will understand from your mind that you really don't mean it any harm and you're just trying to build a bond with it. Very quickly, this Pokemon will allow you to begin getting closer and closer. The time frame varies per individual on this, but it should be a fairly quick process. Food will also help, as in the beginning you'll also be feeding your Pokemon during these trust-building sessions. As well, you'll want to do these sessions in the room that the Pokemon is going to be using as its own space. This way, the Pokemon can get not only used to you, but also used to this being its home and a safe space for it to live in and return to if it does end up teleporting away. Eventually, as the sessions continue, you'll start to notice that your Abra is becoming more friendly and more used to you being there. They'll stop shying away from you and eventually let you get close enough to touch and interact with it, culminating in eventually your Pokemon approaching you instead of the other way around. When you reach that point, then I think it's safe enough to say that you don't need the other Pokemon around anymore to restrict your Abra's teleporting. At this point, if you've been doing as I said and having these trust-building sessions in the room where the Pokemon will be living in, then it should consider this place its home and feel safe there. After that, it's just a matter of setting up the routines that the Pokemon will follow for the rest of its life. Things like where and when it will be getting food, whether you will train it to use your bathroom or to go outside, when and where is the appropriate time to use its psychic abilities, and when it's not. It's going to be a lot of repetition, a lot of rewards for good behavior, and just keeping a positive and happy mindset, as that will really go a long way to helping establish these routines in your Pokemon's mind as a good thing. And again, between these Pokemon being just so intelligent and being able to look into your mind to try and understand what you want from them, they tend to learn these kinds of things pretty quickly. And as they evolve into a Kadabra and possibly even an Alakazam if you want, these patterns will remain with them and you should not have any problems with them even as they get smarter and smarter. Food will thankfully be relatively simple. What you're going to be looking for are a variety of foods that are good for brain development, ranging from leafy greens to a mix of berries and even a little bit of fish. I couldn't find any hard numbers for amounts that you should be feeding them per meal. However, I was able to find that per day, you should be giving your Abra roughly 1100 calories. This should be spread out over the day roughly, as Abra, thanks to its sleeping schedule, doesn't have a normal time to eat. They'll usually just realize that their body is hungry at random points throughout the day and use their psychic abilities to fetch themselves food. So instead of meals for Abra, what you're going to be doing is taking that food dish I mentioned earlier and you're just going to keep it stocked with small amounts of these kinds of food. That way, when your Abra does eventually get hungry, it can just pick and nibble at what it needs. And then just occasionally throughout the day, check on it, see if it needs some more food, make sure it's not running empty, and make sure the stuff that's there isn't going bad, especially the fish, as that can go bad pretty quickly. When they evolve into a Kadabra, you should increase the amount of food they get to 1,350 calories, and you should also swap them over from the nibbling open tray to a more regimented 2 meals a day, as now Kadabra is more awake and is more able to recognize and regulate its own feeding schedule. And then, if you do decide to go through with the evolution into an Alakazam, you'll be increasing the amount of food again to 1,500 calories per day. Keep in mind that these numbers could shift and change based on your Pokemon's actual weight and height, but roughly these calorie amounts are good for the average specimen and should give you a good starting point when it comes to how much you should be feeding them every day. Now, this last bit of the care section is really going to be a few smaller details that are involved with caring for these guys. Abra is meant to sleep most of the day. In fact, the average amount that they'll sleep is around 18 hours a day. They need this to ensure that they'll keep control over their psychic abilities, which are crucial to its mental development. Now, this isn't to say that they're helpless during this time. Thanks to their abilities, they are still fully aware of their surroundings and can even fight, flee, and eat while sleeping. My main point here is don't be worried that your Abra is going to become unhealthy because it always seems to be sleeping. That is a very much healthy and normal thing for these Pokemon to do. When talking about Kadabra and Alakazam, you often see them pictured with spoons or spoon-like objects in their hands. Strangely enough, they're able to use these objects to focus and magnify their psychic powers. How or why this works, I have no idea. But it does, and the Pokemon know this. Hence why they always either have or are looking for a spoon. So when your Abra evolves, just give it one. Any old silverware spoon will do. It does have to be metal, so no plastic spoons, but you can get a pack of those for less than $10. It's not too much to ask that you provide your Pokemon with one of them. But strangely enough, when it comes to Alakazam, they can actually do something incredible. They form their 2 spoons out of their own psychic energy. Yeah, they just make spoons from thin air, which simply blows my mind. So if you really don't want to give away any spoons to your Pokemon, then you don't have to for Alakazam. Though, a really cute touch is that if you give your Kadabra a spoon when they're young, and they keep it when you evolve them into an Alakazam, they'll still use it, and just make 1 spoon out of psychic energy. I just think that it's really cute that they'll keep it as a keepsake even though they don't need a physical spoon. And the last thing that you'll need to be able to care for these Pokemon effectively is that they will need some form of mental stimulation. Just like how you have to take most fighting types to a gym to stimulate their bodies, you'll have to figure out ways to stimulate these Pokemon's mind. When they're Abras and maybe young Kadabras, simple things like puzzles and memory games can be used. Older Kadabras will have more mental development, so they'll need things more along the lines of complex physical logic puzzles. You know, like the wooden blocks that need to be taken apart but they seem stuck together, or a puzzle box that needs to be solved to open it. And honestly, for Alakazam, it's so smart that you may just have to ditch the puzzles and physical interactable objects completely, and exchange them for doing different mental exercises with their psychic abilities. It'll almost be like a workout routine where you come up with things that will challenge your Alakazam's control over their abilities and make them have to work to complete it. These are things like juggling a certain number of objects, using their mental abilities to finish a puzzle, and separating a pile of salt and pepper. Things like this will force your Pokemon to really focus and will slowly work their mind so they can get stronger and stronger in using their abilities. You can find plenty of lists and ideas online for things to have your Pokemon to do, so don't worry if you can't come up with anything for that day or at all. Cost. Abra itself will probably start in the lower end of the high category, and the line will go up from there with Kadabra and Alakazam. That's mostly because all of the trust building that you have to do with the young Abra, and the fact that you often need another kind of Pokemon just to give you those bonding times. Add in the fact that they require so much space, and you can see why they can be so expensive. Luckily, once the Abra trust you, they're very easy to get along with and train, and you can house multiples of them together, which is a slight mitigating factor when it comes to the price. Speaking of the space, these Pokemon are going to be in the moderate category, even if you house them in your own home. Mostly because of all the decorations and mental stimulation games that you'll have to get them. But it will be more expensive if you decide to house them in their own building, so probably best to go with the house method instead. Food will be in the moderate category per month as well, and it's mostly due to the fish. If it were just the greens or the berries, then I would say this would be in the low category. But as we all know, meat is expensive. Thankfully, they don't eat much of it, and the extra that you have can just be frozen. Combine that with buying in bulk wherever you can, and it'll help to keep this cost lower. Conclusion. I don't know, psychic type Pokemon like this that are super smart, I always feel iffy about them. On the one hand, they are still a Pokemon, and while they might be smarter than a human, intelligence doesn't always equate to understanding or wisdom, and they very much still act like Pokemon in the wild. But on the other hand, you really can't treat them as a pet. They are way too smart for that. So it leads to this strange roommate-esque, parent-esque relationship between you and the Pokemon. And I've never really been a fan of having those kinds of relationships. But you might disagree. After all, these Pokemon are generally very well-tempered, pretty simple to care for if you're willing to put in the work on the trust, and can make very engaging Pokemon to have. So if everything I've said in this guide seems like a good deal to you, then the Abra line might just be the perfect Pokemon partners for you. Thank you all for listening, and please join us again next time when we go over the physical counterpart to this line, Machop and its evolutions. Have a wonderful night, everyone.